The average American eats 40 pounds of it a year, driving a $16 billion global industry.
Whether it's pumped onto our movie nachos, whether we're spraying it out of an aerosolized can, it's something we all know and love.
American cheese.
American cheese. It is cheese for most kids when they're growing up.
Today, we eat processed cheese on everything from burgers to macaroni. But at the dawn of the 20th century, it doesn't exist. Now, a visionary entrepreneur will forge a $134 billion empire by reinventing a product that hasn't changed in thousands of years.
You had someone say, yes, it's existed for millennia, but I can make it better.
His bold innovation will put him on a collision course with an unlikely rival.
I did everything I could to keep the company afloat. I have a better plan.
As one of the biggest breweries in America sets its sights on Kraft's crown.
Pabst, as in Pabst beer? Not anymore, apparently.
Igniting an all-out battle for dairy dominance. This is American cheese. It's the early 1900s, and more Americans than ever are working long hours in physically demanding factory jobs, with less time to cook their own meals.
Today, our biggest problem is we eat too much and are fat. 100 years ago, people actually worked. They were physically active, they needed the calories, they needed the energy.
Many Americans turn to dairy products. They're packed with nutrition and cheaper and easier to find than any other staple like bread and eggs.
Dairy could provide the calories, could provide protein, could also provide sustenance for people to work some of the toughest jobs in America.
But at the time, most food is prone to spoilage, full of dangerous chemicals, or both, and dairy is particularly susceptible.
In urban America, your access to fresh food is not as likely. Some people drank alcohol because they didn't have access to pure, clean water. It's, in some senses, a disgusting life.
In the early 20th century, foodborne illnesses, especially connected to dairy, were running rampant. Remember, we're talking about an era that predates modern refrigeration. In fact, in England and Wales, 65,000 people died of TB, died of tuberculosis, just because of illnesses related to spoiled, moldy, or tainted dairy products.
In Chicago, an ambitious young employee of the Shefford Cheese Company has traveled all the way from Buffalo, only to receive a terrible shock.
He had gone to Chicago on a business trip, but while he was in Chicago, he got fired, leaving him stranded in Chicago with $65 in his pocket.
One day, the signature products that carry his name will become American icons.
This is new Kraft spaghetti, new mild American style.
And part of a $45 billion food empire. For now, James L. Kraft is alone, unemployed, and over 500 miles from home.
James Kraft grew up on a farm as part of a Mennonite religion and was instilled a very strong work ethic. So when he got done with high school, he moved to the city and worked as a clerk in a store. As a clerk, he dealt with cheese and started to understand that business and what the quality problems are and the spoilage and all this cheese waste that they're seeing.
At the time, the cheese industry is nothing like what we know today. Cheese is made by small local producers all over the country, and prepackaged national brands don't exist.
Cheese is produced and then sold from the small factory or farmstead that would go to the grocery store in typically a wheel or a block, and then it would be cut off and sold from there.
The moment that you cut into that wheel, the cheese would begin to dry out and crack. You'd have to cut off that dry, cracked, crusty bit in order to cut the next slice for the next customer. And shopkeepers were losing massive amounts of their inventory.
Probably a significant, if not a majority of the cheese that actually got produced probably didn't get consumed.
Kraft realizes that if he can find a way to extend the shelf life of cheese, he can reduce the massive amount of cheese lost to spoilage and make a killing.
So he would cut down the large wheel of cheese, and then he took a jar, heated it in order to kill whatever pathogens he thought might be in it. He put the wedge of cheese in there. And by doing that, you then were able to increase both freshness and food safety.
In 1905, a jar sealed and labeled in a tiny Chicago apartment bears the name James Kraft. And it's the first pre-packaged cheese in America.
So I think this is an insight to his character that he could have packed up and gone home, given up, but he takes the $65 and proceeds to buy a horse and wagon and is going to build this cheese distribution business in Chicago.
The reason that people take that risk is because they believe not just in the food or the product they're selling, but they believe in their self. And that's what will give anyone that push that you need to go ahead and pursue a passion in the food industry.
James Kraft invests the last $65 he has to his name to start a business that sells an unheard of new product, and he has no idea if it'll catch on. Nearly 100 miles away, the company that will one day become Kraft's biggest rival isn't even in the dairy business. They churn out over 100 million barrels of beer a year, making them one of the largest breweries in the country. Pabst Brewing Company.
At the turn of the century, Milwaukee was this epic brewing center. Pabst, Schlitz, Miller, Blatz, they were the big brewing companies in Milwaukee, and so Pabst and Schlitz really vied for that #1 beer in the world.
The company's new president is Gustav Pabst, son of legendary founder Captain Fred Pabst. And his younger brother, Fred Jr., is second in command.
You're late. I guess that's why Dad left you in charge.
Gustav had been essentially groomed for the position of president of Pabst Brewing Company since he was a teenager.
You're the vice president of this company, and I really wish you'd consider acting like it.
Are we really going to do this again?
But Fred Jr. always had kind of an independent streak about him. There was this urge to do something beyond the brewing company, to get out and kind of create his own life.
Fred, I need your help.
No, you don't, Gustav. You're doing great. I don't need to be here.
The Pabst family had a farm just to the west of Milwaukee, and he was much more interested in agricultural pursuits.
In 1905, Fred Pabst Jr. resigns, leaving the fate of the family company's future squarely on Gustav's shoulders.
If you dig into those packets in front of you, you'll find a basic breakdown of a very aggressive plan to bring this factory into the 20th century.
When Gustav Pabst takes over, he's always looking to the best technology, the best brewing processes, updating the mechanics of the brewing company, transitioning from horse and wagons to a truck system.
Automation, electricity, telephones, all the latest technology. Our goal is to maximize efficiency and increase output.
And your brother, he agrees with this strategy.
Fred will no longer be involved with the day-to-day.
Now in sole control, Pabst plans to invest over $1 million of company money in factory upgrades, the modern equivalent of nearly $28 million.
Sounds expensive.
Well, it won't be cheap.
When Gustav Pabst took over the business, he had to fill very big shoes. And the older generation always tends to not trust the younger generation. And when the younger generation do have to step up to, when their wings are ready to fly, it's challenging.
The industry will evolve. And you're either on the leading edge or you're falling behind. It's still my family's name on the side of the building.
If you don't think I'm the right man for the job, vote me out. Otherwise, let me make you rich.
Let's begin.
Gustav's strategy is the most aggressive in company history, and he doesn't know it yet. But it will set Pabst on a collision course with James Kraft. It's 1910, and across the United States, mass-produced national brands like Nabisco, Coca-Cola, and Campbell's are replacing regional products.
We sometimes take for granted today that cornflakes in New York are the same as cornflakes in California. But that was absolutely novel in the early 20th century, that Heinz 57 is going to mean the same thing no matter where you are.
In Chicago, James Kraft dreams of creating a brand of his own, selling labeled, pre-packaged cheese. He's been going door to door with horse and buggy, and the system is as inefficient as it is exhausting.
So for $1.50 a day, he rented a horse and a wagon. The horse was called Patty, so I don't know if you call the wagon Patty Wagon or not. And he's working away and working away.
To help carry the load, Kraft enlists the help of his younger brother, Norman.
You know, Mom told me to ask you if you were dating anybody.
Of course she did. And of course I'm not.
This one's already moldy. I thought you said the jars were supposed to help.
They do, but only by a few days.
During this time, while he is selling cheese, James Kraft is also victim to the same slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that every cheesemaker is. His cheese is falling victim to spoilage, contamination, molds, bacteria, and so on.
Put that one to the side and we'll replace it.
Wait, so you're telling me that this is actually an improvement? There's got to be a better way to package it.
Maybe. But even if there were, as soon as the customer opens it, the clock is ticking. What we really need is a way to make cheese that lasts longer.
Sure. After doing it the same way for 2,000 years. It's a brilliant idea.
For centuries, cheese has been made by using acid to separate milk into curds and whey, then pressing the curds. The most common acid used is rennet, an enzyme found in the stomach of some animals.
Experts argue that the roots of cheese actually are in ancient Egypt. The belief is that a Bedouin had put milk into his sort of wine skin that had been treated with rennet to cure the skin. And supposedly, the jostling of the camel, the rennet, the milk, and the heat created the first cottage cheese.
James Kraft realizes that if he can reinvent the process, he can make a fortune.
You're talking about cheese, something that has existed almost since the dawn of man on Earth. And then a man in early 20th century Chicago decides to take this ancient food stuff and says, I can do it better.
In a bold move, Kraft decides to bet everything on a new kind of cheese that he has no idea how to make. In Milwaukee, Gustav Pabst has invested the modern equivalent of $28 million into modernizing Pabst's operations.
Electrification made it so that people could work and produce whatever product was coming out of the factory around the clock. They could start before the sun rose and they could conclude well after the sun set.
And by 1914, production is higher than it's ever been.
Gentlemen, we're producing 8.5 million pints each year, which more than covers the installation of the automatic bottle washers from last quarter. If sales stay steady, profits should be at an all-time high.
And if they don't?
Let's stop dancing around it. Everyone in this room is aware of the move towards prohibition.
Since the 1840s, religious groups have lobbied against the evils of alcohol, claiming it causes everything from sinful behavior to stomach ulcers.
Many women's organizations are basically chastising excessive drinking. They think that excessive drinking leads to morally corrupt families, bad fathers, bad workers, and that if we could just do away with alcohol, we could have a much healthier society.
The beer lobby is strong. We're confident that our product will not be included in the ban.
Expectations can be wrong.
Meeting adjourned.
Desperate to protect the empire his family has built, Pabst launches an aggressive PR campaign designed to distance beer from liquor.
Gustav was very aware of what the Prohibition movement could do to his brewing company, essentially destroy it. And so he was very proactive. He wrote an article for Cosmopolitan magazine touting the reasons why people should drink beer is that it is a true temperance beverage. So that was the distinction that was being drawn early on, that beer was good, hard alcohol was bad.
Within a few years, Gustav Pabst becomes president of the United States Brewers Association and initiates a tireless lobbying effort to keep Prohibition at bay, for now. In Chicago, James Kraft is hard at work on a new, longer-lasting cheese, one that he believes will allow him to create the first national brand.
Cheese is sort of one of those universally loved foods. You can't talk about pizza or lasagna or imagining pasta without shaking some kind of cheese on it. The idea of revolutionizing that, it's just so crazy. Like, I couldn't see myself looking at an egg and going, there's a way to make it better.
To make the product long-lasting and resistant to spoilage, he's experimenting with an obscure technique called pasteurization.
Pasteurization is a removal of pathogenic microorganisms by heating a food to a certain temperature and holding it at that temperature for a period of time.
Pioneered by Louis Pasteur for the French wine industry, pasteurization has been used by American brewers since the late 1870s. But while pasteurized milk is the standard today, at the time, it's practically unheard of.
So he starts experimenting, gets a big copper kettle, and he throws all different kinds of cheeses in there, mixes them, heats them, and he just gets a big sticky mess.
So many of the names in the food world become such household names that we forget that there was a human attached to it at the beginning. Some of these giants started out as just like one guy doing something crazy.
The problem is when you heat cheese, it can melt. You're not really in control of the temperature. You end up with this mess where you have kind of gluey gobs of protein gel floating in liquefied fat.
This is disgusting.
James Kraft has poured nearly all of his company's money into his new cheese. But after a year, he has nothing to show for it. And he's on the brink of losing what little he has left. It's 1914, and World War I is raging in Europe. But President Woodrow Wilson has kept the U.S. out of the fight.
The United States wants to remain neutral. There were a lot of Americans who felt that we need to stay home, and perhaps we didn't quite see it as our war, our hemisphere.
The conflict will one day help shape James Kraft's legacy. But right now, he continues his quest to create the world's first pasteurized cheese, the key to his dreams of building an empire.
He spent lots and lots of hours testing and stirring in his giant copper kettle, trying to come up with a better cheese. He plays with the temperature, but then he finds that the proteins and the fats separate, and man, it's just awful. He works at it for 3 years.
Finally, after countless sleepless nights, Kraft makes a groundbreaking discovery.
He wanted to get a stable product that didn't have oil separation. The key was using what's called emulsifying salts. They are critical in this reaction.
Emulsifying salts help keep fat and oil from separating, the same way egg yolks or mustard keep oil and vinegar from separating in salad dressing. For Kraft, the result is a smooth, even product.
It's like even when a mathematician is sitting there trying to figure out the equation, Einstein is trying to come with E equals MC squared, and he's spending decades on it. But when he cracks that code, it changes the world.
Kraft finally has a delicious product, but he still doesn't know if it's shelf stable. If it isn't, it could be teeming with bacteria that causes everything from diphtheria to tuberculosis, and he's left it out a full 10 days to find out.
Try some.
After you.
Come on.
I insist. James, you okay? James! Do you need the doctor? James! I can't believe you.
Come on, try some. It's delicious.
He realized that in this pasteurization process, he created a shelf-stable cheese that could be shipped, that was easily reproducible, that lasted a very, very long time, and had incredible flavor.
There's a saying in music that the Beatles have already done it. Anything that's already been written, the Beatles did a version of that. It's crazy to me that in the food space, these people had to create something out of nothing. They were the Beatles. They literally had to take cheese, a product that has been used for thousands of years, and make it completely new. The genius is crazy.
In 1914, Kraft pours all his resources into bringing his new processed cheese to market, risking everything to introduce American cheese to the world.
Look at that. Not bad.
It takes someone who's visionary to come up with something that has never been done before, and not just to see it and think, that's never been done before, but to go out and do it and then make a product that they can sell.
Kraft floods the local market, but Americans have never seen anything like shelf-stable cheese. And he's racking up debt instead of sales.
Hey, this one. This one and this one can wait until the 17th.
One of the things about pasteurization is, if you don't know about it, it sounds really weird. It sounds kind of crazy. And if you've lived a certain way, are you going to trust this new technology, if you will?
People were concerned that this cheese was adulterated because it seemed supernatural for a cheese not to get moldy on a shelf.
Well, the bad news is our sales haven't budged, not even a little. But the good news is the cheese should last until we figure out how to sell it.
Before or after we go bankrupt.
I'll put a pot of coffee in. We'll stay up all night if we have to. All week if that's what it takes. We won't rest until... Where are you going?
Going to church.
Now?
Yeah. Gonna pray for a miracle.
"500 miles away, Gustav Pabst is also on the brink of disaster. He's worked tirelessly to keep the beer industry safe from the growing temperance movement. And with his brother working on the family farm, he's facing the crisis alone.
The two brothers were essentially living separate lives at that point. Fred is very happy to be out in the country and not having to deal with the brewing company, and is interested in the Holstein cattle. So by the late teens, he's starting to think about cheese. While Gustav, he had to deal with the darkening clouds of the Prohibition movements and what that would mean to the family legacy.
Despite Gustav's lobbying efforts, the tide is turning against him.
By the mid-teens, there was a real momentum towards Prohibition. Counties started going dry across the country, and slowly states started going dry.
Gustav Pabst's strategy is failing. And if he can't adjust, the company will collapse. It's 1917, and James Kraft has spent years perfecting his shelf-stable American cheese. But the public isn't buying it, and his company is hemorrhaging money. Then, on April 6, 1917, America enters World War I, sending over 4.5 million troops overseas throughout the course of the conflict.
The U.S. Army was so unprepared for the logistical problem of how do you get an army to Europe that they consulted with Ringling Brothers Circus on how to move mass numbers. So now we have to feed all these troops now in Europe, these Americans.
Kraft's processed cheese is lightweight, full of calories, and stable enough to withstand shipping. So in a brilliant move, he reaches out to the United States Army.
Yes. Yes, sir. 1,200.
He was a very wise and tenacious businessman, and he got a government contract where they wanted millions upon millions of pounds of his amazing bacteria-free processed cheese.
Thank you, sir.
It was shelf-stable for a much longer time. It could be shipped. They had a greater window of time in which to use it, and it's still kind of testament to his genius that he knew the market needed this cheese.
By the end of World War I, the government bought 6 million pounds of his processed cheese. And man, that was a real breakthrough.
Kraft's profits soar, and he quickly expands into a new factory. And as Army veterans return home, they bring a taste for Kraft's cheese with them.
So you would have had troops that have come back from World War I that had this product, and it was a food supply that didn't make them sick, that actually tasted good when they're in the middle of trench warfare. They come home and they want more of it.
By 1918, years after starting his company with the last $65 to his name, Kraft's sales reached the modern equivalent of $119 million. And his signature product is the first cheese to be shipped from coast to coast.
Kraft takes what had been a local industry into being a national product that people felt that they could trust, and Americans embrace it.
Kraft immediately patents his process. He now controls 40% of the cheese market, with no other brand even close, for now. In Milwaukee, Gustav Pabst's worst nightmare is now a reality. In 1919, the 18th Amendment is passed and ratified, making Prohibition the law of the land.
Prohibition, one of the most disastrous policies in American history. You might say, well, how is this possible? How could such an unpopular policy, and it was unpopular at the time, get so much public support? Well, even before America enters World War I, it gets sold as a wartime measure. So of course, if it's going to contribute to the success of the Allies, to saving American lives, of course the American public was going to sign on.
537 barrels of unmentionable beverage with $30,000 worth. And the wrecking gang leave but a memory of dark brown ale.
By the end of the Great War, what we have is an entire society that has now bought into the idea that consuming alcohol is unpatriotic, producing alcohol is unpatriotic, and it's so much more easy for Prohibition.
If you're a beer maker, you're a wine grower, you're involved in this industry at all, you have to immediately start looking for alternatives.
They started thinking about other products that they could start making. Bottled water was one of them. They also created a near beer product called Pablo, the Happy Hoppy drink, which has been described as being essentially an oatmeal flavored beverage in a bottle.
By 1921, the company is on the verge of being broken up and selling off its remaining assets. And Gustav Pabst is at the end of his rope.
This better be important.
Meeting with his estranged brother for the first time in years.
I have something I need to tell you. I'm stepping down. You can't be serious. I did everything I could to keep this company afloat, but I'm done. I just thought you should know. See you around, Fred.
When Prohibition began, over 1,000 breweries across America closed. Gustav just wanted to be out of the brewing industry completely. Fred Jr., he was deeply sentimental and didn't want to just have it all disappear. So he had to figure out what he was going to do.
Years after walking away from his family's company, Fred Pabst Jr. is now going to have to fight to save it. And his ingenuity will pit him against America's largest cheese manufacturer. After years in self-imposed exile, in 1923, Fred Pabst Jr. returns to his family's company with a bold new plan to save it from the threat of Prohibition.
So, I've read the proposal. I've decided we are not selling the company off for spare parts. I have a better plan. We're going to pivot.
Fred now has all of this milk at the farm from his high-producing cows, and he starts thinking, surprisingly, the Pabst Brewing Company complex was kind of built for cheese as well. The stock houses that once aged beer now were aging cheese.
Instead of brewing and pasteurizing beer, Pabst turns its massive resources to making and pasteurizing cheese.
It is very difficult to pivot, but I would say that companies that are more successful have been able to see what other complementary product they could bring to the marketplace, leveraging their technology, leveraging their manufacturing facilities.
Pabst Brewing Company had a national network for distribution that was well-hewn over several generations. Fred chose processed cheese because it could be transported easily by rail across the country.
Pabst perfects a recipe for his own canned processed cheese and calls it Pabstet.
Pabstet was that same orange color, still pasteurized, still processed, that came in a crock, but it was meant to be a processed cheese spread specifically.
Pabstet proves to be extremely popular right from the start. They even create a whole array of cookbooks to show the cook in the household different ways that Pabstet could be utilized, literally from, as they said, from morning to midnight.
In its first year, sales of Pabstet increased the company's gross profit to $1.5 million, or $22 million today. By 1930, Pabstet sells 8 million pounds of cheese, raising the company from the ashes and taking a huge chunk out of Kraft's market share.
Pabst, as in the Pabst beer?
Not anymore, apparently.
When you have a legal patent, you have the right to practice something, and you have the right to prevent anyone else from doing it. You have this competitive product, Pabst. The products are so similar to each other, it really is a knockoff of Kraft. So James Kraft immediately went after him.
Kraft launches a legal assault on Pabst, claiming they're in violation of his patent.
He's operating from a place of indignation. How dare these upstarts who don't even have a background in cheese like he did make a foray into cheese and then actually create a processed cheese in the Midwest, no less. So it put these two at massive, massive loggerheads.
Fred Pabst has just brought his company back from the brink. And now, Kraft is threatening to take it all away. Fred Pabst saved his family's company from the brink of disaster, using Pabst-et cheese to survive Prohibition. Now, a lawsuit by James Kraft is threatening to destroy it.
The Pabst Brewing Company has come up with Pabst-et, this great cheese, but it uses processes that are awfully similar to the Kraft process.
In court, Pabst argues that it's his recipe that makes their cheese unique.
Pabst really felt that his product was different because their cheese was aged longer. It was aged for 10 months. They felt that gave the cheese a more robust flavor. He really feels that he's created something on his own and that he owns it.
Kraft counters that Pabst is using a process that Kraft owns.
You can't patent a recipe because if you change just one detail, that makes it yours. So let's say you have a tablespoon of salt, but you change that to 2 teaspoons of salt, it becomes a new recipe. But you can patent the mechanical process. And Kraft actually did that.
After a grueling 8-month legal battle, the court rules in favor of Kraft.
I think you can completely understand that. James Kraft had an issued patent to be able to control the manufacture of processed cheese, and if you didn't pay licensing fees to him, you were not going to get to use that process.
The future of the Pabst Brewing Company is now in the hands of James Kraft.
Kraft was smart enough to realize, I've caught you, I have a legal right to shut you down. He was also a negotiator.
I propose you keep making your Pabst-et. Put the Kraft name on the label and pay us a modest royalty. I'm offering you a lifeline. I suggest you take it.
He could have gone in and shut him down and said, you're done. You know, you lose all your money, you're done. But he realized he's gonna make more money if he partners with them, makes them pay a licensing fee, and then they share in the revenue from continuing to manufacture at that plant.
Pabst and Kraft come up with a royalty agreement that Pabst will pay Kraft 1/8 of a cent per pound for every pound of Pabst-et that is produced.
With the end of Prohibition in 1933, the Pabsts go back to the business that built their name, brewing beer, and they formally sell their cheese operation to Kraft.
So when all was said and done and beer was once again being produced and shipped out of the Pabst Brewing Company for the first time in almost a decade and a half, Fred Jr. was heralded as the person who did it. He was the one who was able to pull the Pabst name through all those dark years of Prohibition so Pabst could once again brew beer.
Today, Pabst is worth nearly $1 billion.
Pabst Blue Ribbon, it is part of American culture. Had it not been for Pabst-et's processed cheese product, I doubt that Pabst Blue Ribbon would be brewed today.
James Kraft goes on to serve as company president until his death in 1956, leaving a legacy of relentless innovation. In 1937, embracing America's thirst for convenience, Kraft Dinner hits the market. We know it today as Kraft Macaroni and Cheese. And in 1949, he invents the groundbreaking, individually wrapped Kraft Single, both of which continue to dominate American diets to this day.
For me, Kraft cheese was probably the only cheese I knew. You know, Kraft Singles was always in my refrigerator, and Kraft macaroni and cheese. I mean, my mother made that, you know, at least twice a week. It wasn't until I became an adult and had a chance to travel the world and come across exotic cheeses. I didn't know there was any other cheese besides Kraft.
Today, Americans consume an average of 40 pounds of cheese per year, and Kraft is a $40 billion global corporation.
Because of the size of the company, the scope of their innovations, and all of the mergers that they have embarked upon, I think you'd be hard-pressed to open your fridge at home, I know I would, and not find a Kraft product. I still think this makes arguably the best grilled cheese on the planet. Every kid that's ever had singles, you know how to unwrap these crazy things like a Green Beret field stripping an M16. You're like, okay, I find this lip, I pull it this way. And it always sucked if you pulled wrong and this little bookmark of cheese came off. You always had to get deep down into the cheese envelope and get it out. But yeah, I used to love as a kid, you'd like take it and fold it and fold it and fold it. When you eat it, it's like cheese clay, and it takes me right back. It's so much fun. Still fun.